All right. Welcome to What's Next for DevSecOps. I'm Andrew Krug, and I lead the security advocacy team at Datadog. I am joined here by a set of fantastic panelists who I will go ahead and introduce, and they will wave. To my right here, we have Chris Farris from FanDuel. Chris is a principal cloud security engineer. He is also, fun fact, a travel and Lego enthusiast. And he likes to help folks at the security poverty line, whatever that means to you. He may further define that. To Chris's right is Bianca Lankford, Datadog's fantastic VP of Security and now Site Reliability Engineering. And we will talk more about that in the panel. She is a hobby coffee roaster. So stop her in the hall to talk about some green beans. And to Bianca's right, we're also joined by Chad Upton, Director of Platform at Instinct Science. Chad is a serial entrepreneur and apparently as a hobby enjoys creating more businesses.
Yeah.
We're actually going to have to talk about that afterwards. But obviously today we're here to talk about DevSecOps. Obviously, many of you have probably seen some of our efforts around this thing that we're all calling DevSecOps, like the State of DevSecOps report or Datadog's DevSecOps maturity model. But we're really here to theorize on what's going to be going on with this 2 years from now, 3 years from now. Is this a fad? So we'll kind of dive into that. But first, I think what I'm going to do is level set on a definition with the room, which is that DevSecOps is designed to address security issues proactively. We talk about shift left, shift down, shift everywhere. So I'll just ask each of you, how do you personally define DevSecOps?
So I would say it's basically putting security responsibility in the hands of all of our different builders, whether they're in development, SRE, operations. It's a matter of security is everybody's responsibility.
Any follow-ups to that?
I agree. I would add to that it's eliminating the silo that traditional security teams tend to be stuck in, so that we are being much more proactive and engaged with our counterparts who have the controls to actually build in security.
Yeah, I agree on both. I think it's an evolution of a few roles that we've had over probably the last 10, 15 years. We've seen things like system administration, Linux system admins, network engineers, those kind of things. And those roles are kind of evolving into DevOps engineers, platform engineering, DevSecOps. And I think it's a culmination of a few of those things that we're not doing anymore or less of.
And I guess one word answer from each of you, do you think we're still going to be talking about this 2 years from now?
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think the problem's going away, no.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll call it something different. I've heard the term proactive security thrown around quite a bit, but some might say proactive security is just a broader definition kind of for the same strategy.
Yep.
This question goes to Bianca. When we're looking back years from now, what is one make or break thing that we'll be able to cite organizations for that have made this DevSecOps effort? And you can take this either way. You could say what's going to make it a failure or what is ultimately going to make it a success.
Well, from the failure perspective, over-focusing and zooming in on DevSecOps as a terminology, that's something that you have to go make something really huge and big, and working through that and trying to waste your cycles on defining it is going to make it fail. I think what makes it a success is, as an organization and as a business, focusing on practical security, like things that you need to solve for, and aligning parts of your business and parts of your engineering teams and security teams to solve an actual problem that has a finite outcome.
I mean, obviously, anybody else feel free to chime in there as well if there's make or breaks that you have.
I mean, tooling is a big make or break, right? You've got to have the observability into what you're actually trying to fix. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to measure your outcomes.
I think measurability falls into that. I think it's also focusing on, are you focused on security or compliance? Because often those, especially in our builder communities, tend to be seen as one when they're actually somewhat different. And it's not dev compliance ops, it's DevSecOps. So focusing on, hey, what we're actually trying to accomplish is keeping the bad guys out, keeping our data in, and not necessarily whether or not we're, complying with section 24601 of NIST 853.
Well, I think that's actually a really good call out, because there is a tendency to just meet compliance, because that is an easy measurable thing, and the rest of it ends up being much more nebulous, and it's much more complicated in terms of your threats and your models and how you're solving for. And so, yeah, I think that's a really good call out.
Yeah.
I've not personally heard of section 24601, but
fair enough.
One of the strategies I think that people tend to take when they start implementing DevSecOps, and one of the traps that we fall into, is just implementing more and more scanners that surface findings in CI, which kind of goes back to Chad's point from earlier, which is that one of the break things can actually be tooling. We're all literally buried in findings, and alert fatigue is huge. In fact, recent research report I read said that 30% of findings are ignored in enterprises due to the high rate of false positives. So
only 30?
30 sounded a little bit low to me. I mean, obviously, any company that does research reports, the data is skewed towards the positive. But we have this problem with alert fatigue and general fatigue, and I'm curious if we think we're going to solve that problem anytime soon.
I think this is where, as a culture, as DevOps evolves or DevSec evolves, the shift left mentality that we keep hearing over and over for the last few years. That's really kind of like pushing it to the CI/CD pipeline, right? And there's only so much that can happen there. I think that evolution of pushing it even further now, that enables engineers to do things like synthetic testing and IDs, for an example. Being able to know code changes when they're writing the code that's going to cause a vulnerability or might have a SQL injection. Those knowing when we're writing the code itself is really where it's going to matter the most, because once it's already introduced, once the PR is reviewed and accepted, you're already done. So that's where I think there's, around tooling and automation, we're going to have to get way better.
I think it's also a matter of, educating about risk. So when you do have somebody who has a PR and it's flagging saying, hey, you're about to introduce this vulnerability or misconfiguration, what does that actually mean? What could an attacker do with that misconfiguration? If you've got a AWS SNS topic that's publicly accessible, what does that mean? Oh, well, an attacker could subscribe to it and capture whatever information is on it. Talking through those risks. And I think one of the things that I like to talk about when I'm talking about risk is really tying it back to actual incidents, not to name names on stage, but there are a number of companies in the news recently for having incidents and data breaches. And if you can look at those and say, hey, this was caused by this problem, then you have a more compelling story to your builders than just saying, yeah, you have to do that because security says so.
But we have to also be careful to not overwhelm our builders.
Yes.
So when we shift left too far and we kind of decentralize that kind of risk posture, that scenario you're talking about is accurate, but how does that scale? And so this is kind of the interesting space of shifting left. And we talked about this, like shifting, what did you call it, everywhere, and I called it down. And so it's a much more about building the platforms that help us prevent this. And then security plays that role of helping redefine the rules that go in it and ensuring that risk is met. But that's really easy to say, but in practice, it is actually being very aware early on.
Yep.
And I think that's the hard part.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things you get from a deluge of findings is there's data in the deluge. So I was hour ago having a conversation where I was talking about, I had this place and it had a whole bunch of databases with public IP addresses. And, the fact that I had 1,500 databases with public IP addresses was a problem. But the solution wasn't to go fix 1,500 databases. The solution was, hey, why do we not have clean RFC 1918 routing across all of our different product lines and all of our different offices so that builders located anywhere in the globe could access the database in a secure fashion.
So would you say then security's role that in the ton of findings would be look for patterns that can help you get the right platform built?
Look for patterns, and of course sometimes, depending on the security team, find the funding to then put together the engineering effort to solve the root cause. It is about looking for root causes in big piles of data.
How do you get the funding, right, or the people or the resources to be able to do that when most of the time leaders are really only worried about compliance?
So articulate risk, find the compliance framework that says you can't have a public database and then leverage that.
Start with compliance.
Your appeal to authority, logical fallacy, right? And I think a good security leader is about being able to articulate risk to the CFO and the board and getting the funding needed. So I think, it's incumbent upon us as the techies to be able to find the patterns, propose the solutions, and then I think it's articulate the risk to the CISO. CISO articulates the business risk to the board to get the funding.
I think it could actually start even lower than that. I mean, as engineers, you're having to, communicate even to your product managers, right? That's at the lowest level of why we need to do this, why this ticket needs to be in the maintenance lane, why we need to do it now versus later. What is that going to do? So we've got to deal with that even at a much more granular level, even before it gets up into the CISO or CFO level.
Yeah, and I think targeting the product owners, product managers, Scrum Masters, whoever gets to prioritize what stories end up in the sprint, that is a key element of being able to articulate the risk, and then you've got to fight for that with all of the feature requests and deadlines that the PMs are under.
Just curious, how many people in the room would identify as builders versus pure security people? Just raise your hand if you identify as a builder. So the majority of the room. All right, keep your hands up. How many people would like to be creative in the way that they solve security issues that are flagged by the systems that you have? You'd like to apply creative solutions. All right, because I think one of the things that we're kind of driving at here, and we sort of have Chad on one side, and then more security folks on the left side of the stage here. We shifted the security folks left.
See what we did there?
Curious to hear from you, on when you think it is the right time to add a gate for a release, when something necessitates, it's a weighty enough risk that we should completely reject something versus just provide guidance to that team and then start to measure a trend or a pattern of behavior, because we sort of started to talk about that a little bit.
Is this a question to me? Oh, okay. I think it starts with where you've earned trust, right? What's the team maturity? Where's the acceptance level, right? What's the impact of that release? Who's deciding those things, and what trust have they earned to be able to say, no, we're good here, or this is low risk, or this is low impact, those kind of things.
Other thoughts on that? How do we measure unacceptable risk tolerance?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, so I've been getting on a security invariance kick. And those are the things that, at least from an AWS perspective, define as things that should never happen. 3389 on a Windows box open to the world means that you will be ransomwared in hours. That's a security invariant. That's the place where I can say, I don't care what might get broken. We're gonna auto remediate that.
Yeah.
You didn't tag an RDS database. That's not something that So trust is key to maintain?
I think, at least in my experience, I've probably been very fortunate to work with engineering teams that are very curious about security and want to do the right thing. And so the ask has always been, help us define what is non-negotiable. So that's the role of security here in a pipeline. Is like if you're in your deployment pipeline, having a check of things that are non-negotiable. Teams can then participate through a PR and actually have a say in some of these rules. Like, let's say we overgoverned something because we thought it was non-negotiable, but in terms of the business model, maybe it's okay. Also, as our builders work much closer with whatever they're deploying, they can add in additional rules that we can consider as a non-negotiable as well. And so we can kind of define that in like, there are these rules. That's kind of our baseline. That is, you really can't do these things. There's no way. And then some other things that are maybe less critical that we can consider together as how do we prevent it.
And going back to CISSP 1.0, or 101, the business gets to accept the risk, right? So we don't get to say, we say that this will never happen. So any time there's always needs to be a release valve for any kind of security issue where if production is impacted, yes, management can accept the risk right away, doesn't have to involve security. And then, as part of our correction of error, root cause analysis, whatever, we go back through and it's like, okay, how do we get this security piece or the security risk out of the environment now?
Bianca used an interesting term there, which was overgoverned. I've never heard anybody say overgoverned. I always call it developer friction, but I'm curious to hear from each of you, like 4 controls that you've seen that were ineffective. What was the first signal that something just wasn't working?
When I got 10,000 findings and I had no idea what to do with them.
Yeah. Blanketly making a statement on, so like you talked about an open port, but like, we will not have an S3 public bucket in this organization. I've seen that happen, right? And there's legitimate reasons why you do that. So the policy is much different than making that statement. So that's security overgoverning something that's showing a lack of understanding.
Yeah, you actually used my example almost perfectly. So,
yeah, my experience, it has been implementing systems that do not have the ability to grant exceptions.
Yeah.
Having
totally.
that core belief.
Or doing it for security theater, the public bucket thing is, we will not have public buckets, and why are we doing that?
Yeah.
What's the risk of public data in a public bucket?
And security theater is one of my favorite terms there because I reference practical security all the time. Like you actually are securing something that you have a reason to prevent an issue, a breach, something to your business, and not just blanketly taking a bunch of rules that you think need to be implemented.
And I think that's where the concept of can you articulate the risk?
Yeah. But I will say when we decentralize, though, it's tricky to say who's going to accept the risk because you don't always go to the leader or even the CISO to accept the risk. Sometimes.
CISO should never accept the risk. The business needs to accept the risk. The problem is when one part of the business accepts more risk than it's entitled to. GDPR is a great example of 4% of global revenue is on the line. That ends up being a lot of risk that one small wing of the organization might say, I can put this public data or this personal data in a public bucket. I'll accept that risk, and you're accepting 4% of your company's global GDP.
I think one of the things that we're all kind of struggling with there is that in the good old days, we used to have risk registers, and that was how we accepted the risk. The problem is a spreadsheet risk register really doesn't scale very well to cloud scale. And everybody is super, super busy. I'm sure most people in here would not say they have 30% of their time or 40% of their time as a builder to invest heavily in security. So curious to hear from this group, and we'll start with Bianca. How do you effectively sell this idea of investing in DevSecOps to a team that is not a security team?
Mm-hmm. I love that question because the part of selling, it's really about what problem does it solve for them. And in terms of that is they're not going to be the ones who are going to have to be on call for security breach necessarily, because they'll be on call either way, but that's not going to be the primary thing they end up doing. And giving them visibility into what impacts what they're building is actually doing helps that team navigate the space they're in. And so that's kind of what I usually do, is like explain that this is solving a problem for them. And security is part of the entire pipeline of whatever you're solving for, whatever you're building, security is part of that.
I'm offended you attacked spreadsheets.
Other thoughts on that, like how you sell that value into an engineering organization?
Yeah, it's for me, and of course I'm close to platform, so I might be a little biased here. Selling security early into a platform domain or the site reliability domain, right, is a much easier cross-section of people that have to care, right? It's people that are responsible for the incidents. They're responsible for being on call. They're responsible for making sure that observability is mature, right? So they're kind of our first defenders in a lot of ways to kind of see these before everybody else. So empowering them to have more tools, have more mature investments, have the things that they need to be successful are really what I've seen start to work.
I like the strategy of kind of trying to sell the value into engineering versus just sort of hitting folks with more and more progressive training. I think going back to the everybody's busy, one of the things that we've tried to do for a long time as a culture is create programs like security champions or security awareness campaigns. Mm-hmm. And curious to hear from this group, do we really think that strategy is more effective than kind of coming at it in the way that you just described?
I mean, I've got my opinion, but y'all can go ahead first if you want.
So you're saying, is security champions more effective? I don't know. I've not really seen a good security champions program that scaled beyond a couple of folks who were just really interested in the topic. And so, yeah, great. Okay, I've found a handful of folks in my organization who really are interested in knowing what scattered spiders are doing and, what various, Chinese or Russian APTs are up to. And then everybody else is just like, I need to close these JIRA tickets.
I mean, I'm going to answer no. Ambassadors or champions are not more valuable than the route. We're talking about platforms and actually working with engineering to create something together. Mainly because success of ambassadors or champions is very difficult to measure in the organization. And it is like this case of you've trained up few people, they're very interested, but what will that role be in terms of kind of longer term preventing something?
Totally. Kind of going back to what I said earlier, the site reliability, the platform engineers, you have engineers on your teams that I'm sure that gravitate towards things like maintenance lane or infrastructure or configuration and that type of thing. Getting them involved in security early has worked, where it's now you have somebody embedded in the team. Now that team starts to care more about it. Now he's helping educate. Does that scale to 1, 5, 10,000 engineers? Probably not. You have to do something different there. But that's where it helps at a smaller scale to at least get people caring early.
So in terms of the way that organization is structured, we did something recently at Datadog, which is spoilers, because there'll probably be a blog about this here soon. We actually consolidated our SRE team under the CISO, and those folks actually roll up to Bianca now. And I'm curious if you could just share a little bit about the rationale there, and specifically what you think makes a program like that successful.
Yeah, well, we're still in early stages, but the way we started thinking about it, the lead of SRE and then myself, was aligning things that we see that are operational as security that are also operational in terms of how SRE handles a lot of our day-to-day at Datadog. And they're a very strong team that has both the knowledge of the platforms, in-depth understanding of how systems work, and then we have our security team that has operational aspects of red teaming and then attacks. but they could really just be paired with an SRE who has the knowledge, and then you can much more efficiently and effectively work through what you're trying to protect. And that also allowed us to combine our incident response. So we obviously have security response team, but availability incidents are one thing that SRE handles, but why not also inject security? Like, you're not really available if you're not secure. So that was our rationale behind that.
I'm curious to hear from our other panelists on if that is a strategy that you would adopt at your place of business.
Everywhere I've worked, there hasn't been an SRE team.
Yeah.
And so bringing in a whole bunch of product support teams, just wouldn't be viable.
Yeah, I think it's part of the company life cycle, right? If you're early on in a startup, you may have 5 engineers, you might have a DevOps person you've hired at some point. They're your site reliability engineer too, and then you've got other people. So I think it's an evolution as the company life cycle matures. You end up with people that are responsible for site reliability, or people that are responsible for security engineering or security. But embedding them together makes total sense. They're both doing very similar roles and responsibilities, just separate functions. So if you're going to institute, practices, cross-learning, cross-sections of different ways of doing things, then yeah, totally.
The one, I would say, negative for somebody else thinking about this, why we believe this is going to work at Datadog is we have one line of business. We're not a company that supports finance, has a finance sector. I think we are Datadog. So that was an easier decision to outline. I think if we had something vastly different with multiple different SRE types of teams, and it may not be the right thing to do.
I think going to some of the cultural tenets of DevSecOps, it leans really well into this notion that everything is transparent. And we've talked a little bit about incident response. I think it's very easy to say DevSecOps is great because everything is proactive, but really there's also a reactive component too, which is the resilience and readiness to be able to respond when something awful does happen and you're kind of showing up on your worst day and doing your best. Unifying those two processes pays dividends for sure, having 100% of the security people and SRE team doing root cause analysis.
Yeah, because they're already really good at it, right? I mean, that's what their roles are. So having them partner with the security side just enhances that investment.
I don't know if I was a believer initially that there could be one incident response process for operational and security incidents. One had to be specialized, I think, the way I was thinking about it. But it's really just a privacy flag on a subset of incidents, right? You still have to move some of those, maybe not to the entire team.
Right. I mean, yeah, we've gotten into the position now where, yes, regulatory and legal things can't transmit or disclose something broadly to the organization. But those should be very few and far between too. So I think having that broad visibility about what all your incidents, whether they're security or operational, is key.
Yeah, and it's part of the incident process, like where you fork off in that process. It's a serious security thing versus a security threat that you're investigating, and then you're working through that. It still follows that there's some separation, but
yeah, certainly the exception, not the rule.
Yeah.
I would think it would also enhance operational maturity too, right? They're being able to exercise those muscles more often, following the same workflows, rather than it's that one thing nobody wishes would happen.
So that said, now that you have these consolidated teams in this scenario, and maybe even when it's not consolidated, I think one of the most difficult things is defining what actually is secure. So in this, who is defining what the minimum standard, desired standard, and gold standard for security is?
Personally, I think I've talked about this a little bit, as this session's gone on, but that changes over time, just like your company does, just like the number of engineers you have. Early on in a company, it might be your lead engineer. It might be your CFO. I mean, it could be your DevOps engineer. They're the ones building the architecture, right, or the infrastructure. As you get bigger, you have to scale those roles and those responsibilities. You have to start training in different ways. Your tooling gets more mature. You start hiring for certain risk aspects of the company. So I think it depends where you are in that company life cycle.
Other thoughts on who
I would
should
say it's
define
the
it?
threat actors.
The
They're
threat
going to
actors?
define. They're ultimately they're the ones who are going to define if you've done enough.
But I think that's where security matures over time as well. So I think that your point is correct of depending on what size of a company you are. But ideally, if your security team has evolved, matured, and you have a function like research and those types of talented people on your team, then you can create like that, the baseline, and that baseline evolves and the rules evolve that security owns.
So I'm clearly hearing that it's the folks in these teams. Do you think that a service team should be able to create their own definition of minimum security for the service that they're building? Or do you think that an external group is better qualified to do that?
I think an organization has to have its own minimum baseline. Mm-hmm. I think service teams, depending on what that service is and what that is, can go above and beyond.
I agree with that. And the one caution there with like a service team building that themselves, it's really easy to convince yourself you're secure.
Yeah. Or it's really easy to ignore all the flags and feel like, those aren't important. We'll be fine.
A follow-up to that would be when you do that, when you do define that baseline, who should be able to bypass a control?
It's a great question.
So I think it's depends on risk. When I write a baseline, I usually have literally RFC 2119, I think is what it is. Must and should. Must is formal risk register. You're not going to do it, it goes on the spreadsheet. Should becomes okay, these are the best practices that you need to follow unless you've got a absolute good reason for it and you've documented that, because at the end of the day, we are still accountable to auditors and regulators and other things.
I think a follow-up question I have is, why are you bypassing the control? So if it's a emergency and there's a break glass process to do something, people should be able to do that. And as part of a post-mortem on an incident, we talk about what operationally we did and what we have to make sure we fix. Like we had to go out there like this, we accepted it during that incident, and then we go fix it later.
No, I would totally follow that same path as both of you. I can't say that I've ever pulled up the risk register to define if I should ignore it or not. Maybe that's just my role, but there have been plenty of times where I've had to break glass to do something, right? And that's just the nature of a hot fix, an incident, or whatever it may be. But hopefully that's a short-term problem or short-term fix, right? That's not something that should stay that way.
I am honestly surprised that when we asked the question about defining security, nobody said Bits AI. We have about 6 minutes left in the panel, and we are going to take questions from the audience. So if you do want to ask a question, I would ask that you make your way to the 2 microphones in the aisles. So if you just have something you always wanted to ask about DevSecOps and how we're kind of thinking about it in these various organizations, please feel free to come and do that. But before we do open it up to questions, can we just get a hand for our great panelists?
So I think Bits AI may be the reason we're not talking about DevSecOps in 5 to 10 years. We'll just all be outsourced to the LLMs.
Then we move to more things that we can provide value, right?
Exactly.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for great talk. I think that's a very interesting topic for us all. So I'm actually here with a group of customers from Brazil, and we brought a few executives from digital native companies. So, it's a very hot topic for everybody who works with startups. My question is more related to the business side of it, which is how to allocate resources and structure teams in order so you can have SERs, but also DevSecOps, you know?
Anybody want to take that question about how do you decide the headcount?
I can start. So in any headcount planning or team allocation planning, we think about what is it they're going to be doing and what they are expected to deliver. So like if there is no security posture and then it's early there, we would expect you need some security engineers that are going to help you define what to do and make a business case around allocating to there. If we're thinking about, well, we have some security, but we have like zero operational support, then we think about, is that operational support better structured in an engineering organization? Or you actually need security operational support. And it's going to depend upon what you want to do in your business, if you want to keep them separate. And it could be different based on what you're doing. But I generally look at it as like, where are you starting and what are you trying to deliver? And if operational availability is what you're trying to deliver, you push your resources there.
You could also argue that there's opportunity for your business, right? That having operational security or having security engineers allows you to enter markets or get a faster procurement cycle with certain customers because you are things like SOC 2 compliant or ISO 27001, or you've made progress on your risk maturity. So the earlier you do it, the more that you may be able to benefit from it later down cycle.
Yeah, I have seen a lot of companies invest in the security function almost as a sales tool.
Yep. I've been in that role, actually. So.
And I think the other piece of it is like, once you've collected the risk, now you have metrics. Now you have numbers to justify the headcounts. Going back to the example of the RDS databases, right? It's like, okay, we have these numbers, we have this problem. Now we need to fund a solution for that. But you don't know that until you've collected the data.
Right, appreciate it. My question was related. Yeah, I guess you guys answered really good. The reason why I asked that is because whenever we are talking to C-levels in strategy, especially if you're early on or in scale stage, security might not be like one of the topics like full invested, right? So you said, Chad, that you've been in this role, so that's why I asked the question.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no, great question.
Thank you.
We got time for a couple more.
We have time for one more.
One more.
Yeah, so I think Chris mentioned that like one of the greatest tests for your like security success is actors, and that got me thinking about like white hat hacking. Like, does that play a role, perhaps in like a DevSecOps team, to have somebody who's actively trying to break your system, or is that maybe a role that remains on the outside?
I think I think that's traditional penetration testing kind of thing, and whether it's check the box compliance penetration testing or, hey, we're about to release a new product and we really want to know. I think that second case of we're about to release a product, we want to put it through a traditional or a more in-depth penetration test is a good opportunity to engage with your DevOps teams around. It almost becomes a purple team exercise. You've got the red team doing the attack. Hey, do your developers detect the attack? Do they know how to respond? Is the telemetry coming in? All of those things. So yeah, I would say that it is very much penetration testing is a specialized skill set. I wouldn't expect a normal developer to have that, but purple team it together with your developers and with your DevOps.
And that's actually something we do at Datadog internally. We run those exercises with our, we have an internal security team that is that pen testing red team, and then we run those as incidents and testing that entire pipeline to see if we can detect an attacker.
Or even something like chaos engineering.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, start with just the visibility. Do you see anything? Do you have anything like a web application firewall, right? Do you have anything hooked up to your logs so you can actually see these requests coming in? Do you have pattern matching for anything. You could do WAF logs or something like that. Just start getting visibility, and then that can lead to better conversations of, are we even looking for these things, right? Start with the stuff you don't know.
Well, that's all the time that we have. So thanks for the great questions, and thanks for being here with us today. Of course, the panelists will be in the hallway track. Give them one more hand, and then we'll see you later.
Thank you.